So let's start this session about increasing the impact of the academic finance profession through research, outreach, and practitioner collaborations. This is being filmed. It's going to be a big hit on YouTube. So I'm David Stolin from TBS Business School, and this is a topic that I think is just incredibly important to our profession, how to increase our impact. And the two specific ways that are going to be emphasized in this session are through research outreach and practitioner collaborations, but they feed into other things. If you want to impact regulation, these things help. If you want to be a more effective educator, if you're collaborating with companies, if you're getting your research profiled in newspapers, that also helps. I want to encourage you to ask questions. Actually, you're free to come up to the microphone, but you can also ask questions anonymously or not anonymously on slido.com. There is a 7-digit code that you can enter. We'll see your questions. You can upvote and downvote questions. We have a fantastic panel. We have Shaojun Zhang, who's assistant professor of finance at UBC and OSU, former portfolio manager, associate editor of the Journal of Portfolio Management, has a lot to say about the practitioner side. We have Paschal Okwundu, who's founder and CEO of Binta Financial, which is a fantastic fintech. He'll tell you more about this. Just won a very prestigious award for his fintech. Gordon Hoekstra, who's a reporter at the Vancouver Sun, who writes stories on various aspects of business. And we have Jacob Samuel, who's a comedian and writer and cartoonist. And both Gordon and Jacob actually have undergrads in economics. And so they'll help us attack the side about communicating about their research. And Shaojun and Paschal will help us understand about effective practitioner collaborations, but it's not going to be siloed, so everyone can pitch in on either side. What are my credentials? I'm not the most important, exciting person here, but just briefly. On the communication side, I have worked for years with comedians and making communication about finance more engaging. And that won an innovation award from this esteemed organization, a bunch of other awards. And probably the pinnacle of that was producing the Finance plus Humor program at the 50th anniversary meeting of the European Finance Association a couple of years back. And what can I convey out of all of this experience of years of working with comedians? I think really the best takeaway is if you were to watch the Finance Meets Comedy talk show, which is on YouTube, which was produced at the 50th anniversary meeting of the FA, where we had comedians interviewing researchers, including Ben Hoekstra, Nobel Prize laureate, the way entertainers would be interviewed in a talk show, but talking about their research. And I think watching this and putting yourself into their place and seeing, okay, how would I do if I were in that situation, if I were interviewed and was supposed to be engaging? That's a very useful exercise, and I would recommend going through that exercise. And on the collaboration side, actually my first collaboration with practitioners was with ESDAC, and this dates me because ESDAC hasn't been around for almost a quarter century. It was an attempt to establish a European version of NASDAQ during the late 1990s. And I learned that actually you need to invest a lot in these collaborations. You need to go out there, you need to talk to people, you need to understand what they're doing, market your research to them. The payoff is that we got an R&R in Journal of Finance. Unfortunately, I was inexperienced, we flubbed it. But the second time I collaborated with practitioners, Investment Management Association, UK investment body, I was a little bit more experienced, and that also got an R&R in Journal of Finance, and that got published. And this kind of anecdotal evidence, but it kind of tells you that if you can get access to unique data and you really understand, talking to practitioners, what this data is telling you and how you can leverage it through research, that can have enormous value for you also as researchers. And more recently, I chaired Future Finance Fest, which facilitates collaboration between finance academics and fintechs. And what's my offer to you? What's the takeaway for you out of all these years of experience? Really, I would recommend watching a keynote from Future Finance Fest by Antonio Gargano called Lessons from FinTech Academic Collaborations. He's published a number of papers in top journals from collaborating with fintechs. And again, you can watch it on YouTube. So I'm going to turn it over to our panel. And I think Shaojun is going to be the first one to talk about her thoughts, her experience on practitioner and academic sides working together.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. So let me start by introducing a little bit about myself. So I've been working in academia for quite a few years. So I started at Hong Kong University of Hong Kong, then I moved to Ohio State. I've been at Ohio State for like 8 years now, and I recently moved to UBC, so this is actually my first year. I think what's unique, a little unique about my experience is I've previously worked as portfolio managers at CIC, Chinese Investment Corporation, as well as Vanguard, actually trading the portfolios. And I also do a lot of academic research, but I also do like more of industry practitioner kind of researches because I'm on the board of Journal Portfolio Management. So we do a lot of special issues, sometimes about opinions, and sometimes just the newest frontier researches that we think can be useful to practitioners. So let me start by saying impact is hard to come by. So if our research is not getting a lot of impact, we shouldn't get much distracted by it because it is hard to come by. So on the right, I have the journal metrics by Journal of Finance. As we probably all know by today, it's like the median size is like 5. The average size is like 26 because some papers do get a lot of size, very much skewed. So only a small fraction of published papers gets a lot of academic impact, not to mention the industry impact. So it's very difficult to change the world irrespective of whether you are in academia or in the real world. Now, what's the difference between academic and industry kind of research? I think first, just topics, the style. I think for academic research, we care about trendy topics, but we also care about timeless topics. So for industry, the topics tend to be more timely, although the timely topics do come back. For example, after COVID, in the industry, everyone starts talking about inflation and what's the impact of inflation. Inflation hasn't been here for a long time. No one has done research on inflation, but suddenly it comes back. It's something we need to come back on. And second, I think the industry research tend to emphasize common sense, a simple story, than like very intricate economics, because it's something that you need to bring to the clients. And what about academic research? First, we emphasize rigor. We care about causal relations. We care about how true it is. And we care about depth. We want to go as deep as we can into the topic. We're oftentimes experts in a certain topic, and we have been doing that for decades. So this kind of luxury kind of doesn't exist in industry because, trends change, clients' taste change, and the research change immediately. Now, how can we make impact for research? I think a big part of that comes from just a topic, what we work on to some extent. Now, for the industry people, they would be asking, what do we do? As the biggest question, and they care about why we do it the least. It's kind of the opposite for the academics. A lot of the research are positive instead of normative, so we actually care about why we do it. It's like 7%. 70% is why we do it, and 30% is how we do it. But if we look at our academic research, much of the research has revolutionized the world and made huge impact. There are a few types of research that I see have been most impactful. The first type of research is more like a problem-driven applied research. I would say this is an academic field that has created the entire quant asset management industry and generated trillions of dollars and made a lot of our colleagues and friends super rich as well. So, for example, there's market efficiency that motivated passive investing. There's a Black-Scholes formula that started the entire trading desks and options and futures on the Wall Street. There is very current research on efficient frontier signal research, factor timing. If you work on any of these topics, it's very likely you will get asked by some hedge funds or some asset management companies to come present your work. And they want to learn from you, and they can have your strategies implemented in their daily operations. So effectively, we are doing the kind of the industry research that industry people are using, and they're implementing it because we're kind of doing the same thing with a slightly different angle and different focuses, but they could be faster than us. The second type of research that I've seen has been impactful would be research on emerging trends and technologies. I think that's one thing that people oftentimes complain about academia is how slow things move. It takes years to write a paper, to publish it, to see it published through. It's completely different in industry. So people work on very fast topics, and 6 months later, they're working on something completely different. So industry people really need to make quick business decisions before they fully understand the trend and the consequences. To some extent, you're flying an airplane while you're building it at the same time. And this is where they can actually use some insight from us, from those of us who are working on this like emerging topics. I'll give one example about my own research. So as we know, ESG investing and climate-related investing has been taking off from, I would say, something like 2015, 16, and it's been exploding. So people have been doing it for 5-6 years, but people don't really understand what's the risk and return trade-offs. How do you measure the carbon transition risk? Does that really matter? So there's actually very little understanding of it, despite people have been very heavily vested in it. And this is where my paper on the carbon returns across globe coming. So my paper tackles how do we actually measure firms' carbon emissions, which firms are brown, which firms are green, what's the time lag if you're going to invest in it, what's the process actually like, and is it priced like in the US and globally, in sample, out of sample. So this paper eventually got published in Journal of Finance. It was kind of a battle in academics, but in the real world, the battle is still going on. So there are still a lot of current debates, and there's a lot of money involved in it, in how to measure emissions and how to classify firms brown and green. So I'm still in the conversation with a lot of hedge funds and asset managers, leading ESG institutions, talking about how we make it better. So sometimes it's just a couple of years for us to publish a paper, but it actually takes much longer to move the business paradigm. Okay, of course, there are way more topics. Those topics pop up in like AFAs, WFAs, but they also pop up in a lot of industry discussions, like private credit. Private market has been so popular. There's so much research in it. Blockchain, crypto, AI, social media, data economy, the trends in the market, indexing, robo-advising, target date funds. So there are many new things that's happening in the world, and they are all, if you're doing research in any of these areas, it's great because you are going to impact the world. You're going to change the world a little bit. Okay, the next type is understanding like a consumer or investor behaviors. I think this line of research can also be incredibly powerful. For example, the 401k. So people started the research on understanding the power of default options, because oftentimes we just choose a default. And so we can nudge people to do better in their personal finance. Ever since we switched people to doing the default is saving in 401ks, the take-up rate for 401ks for the newly joined people went up from 50% to 80%. So this is one of the most powerful that most impact finance research can actually have. This is also where data partnerships can come in, and research can directly add value to the startup that you're in particular partner with. So it's almost like a semi-consulting relationship, although with the right structure and the right incentives, you can still conclude, objectively as you're supposed to. But you are directly helping the business to understand their customers, understand their investors, and you can add value to help this entire industry really grow. Okay, a couple of things that I think would be very helpful in adding to the impact of the research. One is just be vigilant about where the market is going. There have been so many trends, so many things happening in the market. I started doing my PhD right after the financial crisis. So when I joined grad school, the research that I heard is actually quite atypical in the sense that everyone was talking about financial crisis, all the research were about financial institutions, or about systemic risk. And I thought those were like the most important topics in the world. But that also tells you, like, top scholars are very vigilant about where the market is going, what's happening. So we do need to have some sense of where the market is going, what's the up and coming trends, so that we can stay relevant. And last one, I would just say, promote and share. You're the biggest champion of your research, your own work. So if you want other people to share it and have an impact on other people, you got to share it. So we kind of need to be relentless and shameless in promoting our own research to have an impact. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Jun. We'll keep questions for after all the panelists speak. And so the next panelist to speak is Pascal.
Okay, hi. My name is Pascal, and it's a pleasure to be here and to see all your great faces and also share the platform with my fellow panelists and David. So I'll give a quick background of who I am. So my background is in engineering. Don't ask me why I'm in this room. So I started from engineering, and then I went to work in private equity, did some asset management work across Africa, and then I moved to Canada a few years ago. Did some work with the Royal Bank and Bank of Montreal, and then I spent the last part of my corporate life doing management consulting work for financial service organization, and recently now I'm building Binta. So I'll tell you a bit more about the kind of work that we're doing at Binta. We are building one of the first and most robust platforms that allows credit bureaus from different parts of the world to sync their data on our technology, so that when people move from country to country as migrants, they can easily carry their financial records with them. And it opens up opportunities for them in housing, banking, and any business that requires credit history. So that's what we're building. But before I speak a bit more about what we do, I would just like to share some stats. I'll tell you a bit about my journey and how the business came to be. So I migrated to Canada a few years ago as an international student to do my MBA at UBC. And when I came in here, I was very excited to live in beautiful city. But unfortunately, it was a real challenge for me. And having come from a hardcore finance background, great job that most people really desired in Nigeria at the time, I came into Canada. I thought everybody would be excited to see me and happy and give me a handshake and rent a place. But unfortunately, I experienced some real challenges. So it was really hard for me to rent a house when I came into Canada. And the reason was because they told me that I did not have Canadian credit history. So I thought that was all. And then a few months after that, I had a great job with the bank, and I tried to buy a car, and I was asked to pay 13% plus interest rates to buy a car. So it just wasn't making any sense to me. But I used to be a banker. So after that, I decided to start looking into the whole challenge that immigrants face with credit. And I realized that credit is a core 3 digit number that has a huge impact on what you can and cannot access in a country like Canada. So I started digging deeper into the whole mystery of credit, and I found out that the problem was not unique to me because I came from Nigeria. I'm sure you're all familiar with Nigerians and the Nigerian princes. So I thought that was a problem, but it wasn't. I found out that it was a common problem across most immigrants that Canada was bringing on. And now the challenge was you have all these very smart people from other parts of the world come to Canada, go to the US, and unfortunately, it's very hard for them to access housing and banking services in a new country. So that was the problem we set out to fix. Now, the other challenge was there were businesses, property management companies, landlords who also want to do business with immigrants, but they do not have access to the right data to do so. So we saw that there was a gap between the immigrants, the businesses, and everybody who wanted to work together. And that was what led us to dig deeper into the work. And the problem right now is that credit history is siloed. So if you are coming from the States, as my friend Shaojun and I were talking a few minutes ago, if you're coming from the States, you cannot just transfer your credits to Canada and use. So that's a big problem. And that's part of what we're trying to fix right now. So credit systems currently are siloed and they are geography based. So if you cross borders to any country, you have to start from scratch. And today, there are over 300 million people globally who live and work in countries where they were not born. So that tells you that this is a problem not just within Canada, but it's a global challenge as well. So each time you cross a border, your whole credit history resets and starts from zero. And that's what we decided to fix, because we see that this is, from our calculation, it's over a $500 billion challenge that the world is facing because of this whole siloed credit history problem. So this is what happens when you cross a border. When you move from Canada to the US, this is what happens. If you come from India to Canada, this is what happens. So we're trying to make this whole scenario history. And the real economic consequence for this problem is not just that people are denied housing, it also prevents people from contributing to the new economy and where they are coming from because of this challenge. And also banks, landlords, anybody who needs to make a decision with a migrant, they are only doing guesswork. So the best they can do is to estimate what your risk level is, and then they'll make a decision. We're trying to take off that whole guesswork in the process as well. And we're also trying to make sure that the capital that banks deploy for migrants or migrant-owned businesses are all efficiently deployed. And so we think that there are interesting opportunities for us to work with academia, right? For anybody building a startup, especially in the tech space, it's very fast-paced, right? You have a plan for 6 months, and in 6 weeks, you're trying to leverage new technology to move faster. But in as much as we're trying to move fast as a company to fix the kind of problem we've decided to solve, we also want to move smart, right? And moving smart in this context is if we can find very strategic collaborations with academia, I think it will help our work better. We are accessing over 400 to 1 billion data profiles of migrants from Nigeria, Philippines, India, Brazil, Mexico, and a bunch of other countries. And we think that this is data that academia might be interested in to work with us and see how we can fix this problem and make the world and migrant experience better. So in terms of how we think we can collaborate, there are a bunch of things we can do together. We can explore evidence-based impact research together. We can show you some of the impacts that we are making with our technology, and you can see how that can translate into research and some simulations and modeling from your end as well. We can also work together to design better credit models that financial institutions can use to underwrite migrants better. And we are also having policy-level conversations with some provincial governments, which we are planning to take to the federal level as well. If this is something that is of interest in the academia, we can explore those opportunities together. And what we can bring to the table, we can give you access to data, anonymized data. I want to be clear about that, right? And we can explore rapid experimentation projects together and explore how we can scale the impacts of the work that we are doing. Ultimately, this is the problem we're trying to solve. So when you cross border from country to country and you have an 800 credit score in the US, that should follow you to Canada. So this is the vision that Binta is building today. And if you're wondering how does this work, so these are all the countries that we are working with for now. We access financial records, credit history from these countries. And then our technology is able to process that data and translate it to the Canadian equivalents of your credit score from those countries. And then ultimately, you can use that to access banking services, housing, and anything that requires credit information. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Pascal. Gordon?
Good afternoon. It's very nice to be here. My name is Hoekstra. I'm a reporter at the Vancouver Sun. I've been a reporter there for 15 years, and I've been a reporter for more than 30 years. I would say that in terms of trying to connect to general audiences through the media, through newspapers or even through television or otherwise, one of the things to keep in mind is that journalists are by their nature generalists. It's true that in some cases, journalists might work in a certain area for, and build up knowledge and expertise if they're working a beat or a certain topic for, maybe for a lengthy period of time, but that still doesn't make us experts. I've covered things, from money laundering, I've done some investigations on that, to Ponzi schemes and other kinds of financial fraud, examining hazard, mismanagement in terms of things like wildfire and floods. But even though I've built up lots of sort of experience and knowledge about those things, it doesn't make me an expert. And so journalists in general, certainly at our newspaper, we often turn to academics, professors and others at universities and colleges to inform our reporting. It provides credibility. We also will cover studies if it's relevant to the kinds of things we're covering. Obviously, if those papers or research is topical, and is involved in something that's a topic that is of general interest to the public, it might get more interest. A search of our database in the past 10 years showed nearly 6,700 times in which we quoted a university or college professor. That's a lot. That's nearly 2 a day. We have, because we have an online publication, we have an endless stream of stories that are running. But it just sort of shows you that we are reaching out to academics, all the time. Of those stories, we quoted academics in relation to finance and economics and business 2,000 plus times. So I did stop into a couple of the sessions here, and it's true that in some cases, if you're dealing with very esoteric topics, it might be difficult to kind of make that link between a general audience. But it is certainly true that journalists are seeking out research and professors all the time. Recently, one of my colleagues quoted a Carleton University economics professor in an article about how British Columbia's property tax system benefits the wealthy, including multimillionaires. In BC, we have a system in which you can defer your property taxes after you're 55 years old. And the article had talked to some people, including some professors. And what it showed was that people who are more well off are using they're deferring their taxes because they only have to pay that back after you sell your house at, I think the cost for is less than 2% of prime. So it's a pretty good deal. And so people who are smart with their money were taking those savings and plowing them into other investments. And it showed that other people who have, are lower down on the economic strata or don't have that kind of knowledge are not doing those kinds of things. So it kind of creates an inequality in the system, and some of the people we talked to were critical of that. And so, that piece was informed by talking to people who are professors, who are academics and work in this kind of area. I've talked to professors at the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser. Simon Fraser was in Burnaby, and then University of British Columbia here in Vancouver, on to understand the benefits and challenges of an empty homes tax that we have here. That's meant to it's introduced by our province in, I think, 2018, and it's an effort to turn empty homes into rentals. So if you charge this kind of tax, it's 0.5% of the assessed value. So particularly on more expensive homes, which we have many in British Columbia, if you have a $5 million home, that can be a considerable amount of money that you're paying in additional tax if it's empty. So some work that's been done has shown that actually puts more of these places onto the market, or encourages people who are not using these homes to sell them. We also have covered studies. We do cover studies. Again, it depends on the topic and what would be of general interest to the public. I mean, recently, a University of BC researchers crunched some numbers and found that if you have an electric vehicle compared to a regular vehicle, if you run it far enough and long enough, that it saves you money. And that was a study that came out of the University of BC. I've done some extensive work in sort of the wildfire and flood area, and I wrote a story not too long ago that was based on a study in which it found that if you lived in a region that had frequent wildfires, that you were more susceptible to had a higher incidence of lung cancer and brain tumors. So these are kind of things, particularly in our area here in British Columbia, in which we have lots of wildfires, that people are interested in hearing about. And again, that was based directly on a study that was carried out by the University of BC. So what makes an academic study catch a journalist's eye? I mean, honestly, it could be anything that the journalist or the editors think would be of interest to the public, and also something that is in the public interest. Sometimes those are the same thing. I mean, for example, there was a study conducted by the University of Arizona and Georgia about what makes people cool, not the temperature cool, but the sunglasses cool. And it found that cool people were largely perceived to be extroverted, hedonistic, powerful, adventurous, open, and autonomous. Another study on the side effect of antidepressant drugs that was carried out by King's College London and the University of Oxford found that that it varies widely. These are both things that obviously reporters and editors found that would be interest to the public, and they were both covered recently in the New York Times. So again, it shows that there are things that like big newspapers, both in the U.S. and Canada, are interested in covering. This research, again, that is topical and current will be of greater interest to the journalist. So, for example, research on trade conflicts, I mean, given the recent move away from a global free trade regime in the U.S., is of interest. So if you are carrying out research in this area and it's being published, right now, that could be I'm certain it would be of interest to journalists and newspapers. A quick review of the speakers list at this conference shows there is a lot of research that would definitely be interesting to the public that is of a financial nature. That includes studies I saw that on stock market volatility, COVID-19, forced investment in housing, artificial intelligence, data privacy risk, climate risk, freedom of information and pollution. There was even a study on the impact of paid sick leave on hospital care quality. The study found it improved care. So how do you connect with a journalist? If you have a university or college that has a media or communications department, often they can help you do that. I don't know how it works in the United States, but certainly in Canada, there are many universities here that have media liaison officers within their communications department, and they will keep an eye out, or they'll get notified, I guess, by the researchers themselves about it's the research they think is interesting to the public, and they will put together a news release. It'll include quotes from the professors, and then sort of like, and it'll be constructed in sort of plain language. They translate the kind of, the stuff that would be written in the journal article into something that would be more immediately understandable. And so if you have that at your university, you could reach out to them. I mean, if you have a relationship with a journalist already, you could reach out to them directly, particularly journalists that you know that are working in your area. Perhaps that's from talking to them in the past. And so, it's a matter of communication and trying to make a connection out there. And you can do that, especially if you're working for the communication departments, it might be done in a very sort of blanket manner. So they might send a news release out to multiple organizations. But if you have a relationship with a journalist, you can reach out to them directly. Now, what can kill a pitch or reduce your chances of, getting the attention of journalists? Using academic jargon, that will kill things, because obviously I read academic papers all the time, and if you read those, that's not how everyday people speak, and probably not how if you just send your academic paper to a journalist, it's not likely they're going to read it. You're going to have to do a bit of a translation for them. Also, like pitching to the wrong publication or journalist, because we're talking about things that are doing, deep into the finance most of the time. There could be some crossover to general publications like mine, the Vancouver Sun, but you're probably going to be pitching to places like the Wall Street Journal, more business-oriented publications and magazines. Particularly if you were doing something to do with, like AI, you might try and seek out like a tech publication or something like that. Some of it is just logistics. Particularly for journalists who may be on a tight deadline, you need to provide contact information, times that people are available. If you can provide cell phones, so it's very easy for people to get a hold of the researcher, that's really, really valuable. Because if a journalist can't easily get a hold of someone, I've had it before where somebody puts out a news release, you're interested, and then you go to phone the people, and then they're not available. Well, then you're probably, because other things are going to come up, it's just the nature that that's going to get dropped. Again, if you have relationships with journalists and you know that you have some important research that you think they might be interested in, you can give them a heads up. Tell them that when the study's coming up, you might even provide, if you have a relationship of that kind, an embargoed copy to them. And then that allows them to dig into it before, you're going to hit sort of send, and then they can start writing about it. In terms of like the balance and nuance on headlines, what's the right way for an academic to ensure their nuance survives the news piece? A lot of that has, so you're trying to preserve your work. You want a news story to say what your research says and not something else. But that can be done through that communication work in terms of translating the academic writing to plain language. Interviews to explain the work. I couldn't overemphasize how critical it is, like, to be actually speaking to the journalist. That sounds like it makes sense, but there are some folks that, are, again, like if they don't make themselves available, because that back and forth in terms of talking to the journalist will help hammer out those points that the journalist might not be clear on, and so you can be more assured that that work is going to be presented in the way that it actually exists in the research. Again, if you know journalists interested in your research and have experience with them, and they have done work in your area, and they're already knowledgeable in that area, then reaching out to them is going to increase the chances of them dealing with it with that kind of nuance. And if you don't have relationships with journalists or know journalists in your area, you could work with your communications department to find out if they know of journalists that would be the kind of people to send your work to, or you could reach out to the local news organizations or organizations that you respect, to try and make contact with those kind of people. And I also would just say, if a journalist reaches out to you, contacts you out of the blue about some topic or something they're interested in talking to, see what they want. I mean, I often, when I'm working in a new area, I start by searching EBSCO, the research database, to see what kind of work has been done there. Recently, I was doing some work on expensive drugs for rare diseases. There was a contentious case with a patient here in British Columbia. I didn't know much about the area, so I jumped into EBSCO, found some research papers that were right on the mark on that kind of research, ended up reaching out to the writers of those papers, and I wasn't immediately able to get all those papers, and so the researchers sent me the papers. I read them. It formed the basis of my research, and then I interviewed those people, and it turned out to be like a good relationship that I ended up having with them. I mean, and so if those people later on were to reach out to me and say, hey, I've got some research that I think you'd be interested in, I'm much more likely to to take a look at it because I already also have a relationship with them. And that's sort of what I would finally say, that I think that part of this about trying to, make a connection between the conduits to sort of the general audience is about building relationships. And that's just going to increase the chances of your work reaching that general audience and of that work being treated in a nuanced manner. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Gordon. Jacob.
I got a BA in economics from McGill University many years ago, pretty impressive. And after that, I became a stand-up comedian, which is something I've been doing since 2011. I do it professionally. And if you've never seen me before, it's because I've been on Canadian TV many, many times. I don't know if you guys are from Canada. Here, comedy is basically like a subsidized form of entertainment for the elderly. That's who watches CBC. So I'm here with the goal of, I want to tell you communication lessons from stand-up comedy, but I'm going to do it through the frame of economics. Like just by raising your hand, who here has at least taken a course in economics? So are you in the wrong room? Why are you here? Okay, almost everyone. So hopefully this makes sense. And one of the broader points I'm going to make is that having a joke land is basically a subset of making a logical point. So things that are true about telling jokes to people are also true for just speaking about anything that involves logic and having an audience understand it. So I think it is pretty universal. So like any proper economics class or theory, I'm going to start with some axioms. The first one is what I call no one wants to listen for free, or really people just don't want to listen at all. I know this from stand-up comedy because when you do comedy, people either laugh or they don't. You can tell if you succeed or fail, but in the regular world, people are polite and they don't tell you when a talk is really boring or they didn't care. But I see it all the time when people talk where I'm like, oh, you bombed. No one cared about what you said, but no one said anything because we're polite. And so with any talk, you want to satisfy this formula, which is that the expected value of listening to you has to be higher than the expected value of doing anything else, right? And that's any distraction. That's people going on their phone, daydreaming, thinking about their marriage, their kids, whatever, doodling. It's so easy for people not to care. And that's basically my point here, is that it's a very high bar. So entering any talk in front of people, you have to be thinking that it's not going to be easy to keep people's attention and you are competing for it. And don't be fooled by their politeness, because we all space out. And so basically, if you don't satisfy this, that means you're bombing. And most people don't know when they bomb when they're not comedians, but it happens a lot. The other axiom is that talks only succeed when the presenter and audience are cooperating. It's a two-way street. So people ask me what it's like being a comedian, and I often explain that really it's a dialogue. You're having a conversation with the audience, right? You're trying to elicit a certain response, and you're giving space to the audience. You don't want them just to say whatever they want, but you treat it like that. And so I came up with this game theory type diagram, like a prisoner's dilemma. And so what you're trying to do in any talk is have the audience be engaged, and for you to be engaged as a speaker. That's when you're succeeding. The other equilibrium is that the audience doesn't care and you don't care. And those are the two kind of states that things move into. So sometimes you start a talk and you're very enthusiastic about it as a speaker and the audience doesn't care. And if you can't win them over, you're falling into that bottom corner. Or maybe the audience is really interested in a talk and if you go to a comedy club, you're excited to see who's coming out and the comedian sucks, you fall into that corner. So there is a relationship of trust that's created. So I just have 4 lessons in this broader theory. So the first thing is to open strong. So in stand-up comedy, we talk about having an opener a lot. So we put a lot of thought into the first joke we say on stage and the first things we say on stage, because it's so important to signal to your audience that you are someone who is worth listening to. Like that first laugh is so critical for the rest of your set. And it's similar to the economic concept of signaling, which is just that where you want to indicate that, like I start a comedy set. I know the jokes I have. I know they work, but I need to convince you to trust me that this is going to work. So I need to do it's the same as economic signaling. And the lesson here is like always start strong. Don't waste time at the beginning in terms of giving out a point of value. You need to do something like as soon as you can that wins over the audience in some way. The next lesson is to know the value of the points you're making. So when I am putting together a set of jokes, you got to believe that I know the relative strength of all those jokes. I know what's supposed to get a big laugh. I know what's a weak joke or weaker. I know what things I might be trying, and I'm going to try jokes I'm not unsure of. I'm going to put next to stronger jokes. I'm going to structure it in a way to make sure the audience gets the payoff they need. And so, like in economics, it's just that you know like the value of an asset. And it's the same thing with a talk. You have to know like what are the big points I'm going to make that people are really going to connect with, and where are they in that talk? And what parts of my talk are weaker? Because maybe those parts you might need to add something to keep people's attention. The third lesson is word efficiency or word economy. And what that means is basically we try to make jokes work with the fewest amount of words possible. Because the fewer words you say, the bigger the laugh you're going to get. Just think of any joke you like and then imagine someone saying it in twice as many words. It's never going to be as good. And it's a basic productivity thing. Every word you say when you are talking has a cost. And so if I'm preparing a set or a joke, let's say, and I'm going to say a lot of words, I know that the payoff has to be bigger. So I can get away with saying more words if I'm going to get to a really big laugh. But if I'm getting to a smaller laugh, I cannot use as many words. And another lesson there is that speaking is very different than writing. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make in terms of public speaking is that they go and they write a speech. They write what they want to say. And what works for writing is not good for speaking because it's too wordy. Like the basic structure form or the basic element of writing is a sentence. But when you speak, it's really words and phrases. And so when people write what they want to say first, it just ends up being way too long, and then it's hard to say, and it's too many words for the value you're giving your audience. The fourth lesson, which, this may be also a lesson for life, but it's just to be as likable as possible. But it's actually, there's specific elements when it comes to public speaking. So in stand-up comedy, we try to develop an act that will give us as much goodwill with the audience as possible. The more the audience likes you, the easier it is to win them over and get them laughing. It's like an intangible asset you have. So someone who's really likable might have jokes that aren't that great. They can still make an audience laugh more than someone who has great jokes and is not at all likable. You can't disentangle the person who's saying the words. And basically, likability increases the expected value of what you're saying. The more likable you are, the higher that value. But creating that likability it requires a lot of deliberate thinking as a speaker, because it isn't the same as just being a likable person in everyday life. And I actually think there's a model for likability when you're talking in front of people, and it's a function of three things: performance, content, and authenticity. And what these mean is like the performance element is like being a good performer, speaking clearly, projecting, what you think of when you think of a good entertainer. Content is basically that what you're saying isn't BS, that it actually has value to people. And authenticity is the one that I think is the most poorly understood and hardest to define, but it's not the same as being authentic in real life, because being authentic in real life is being a genuine person. You cannot really be a genuine person on stage because you can't explain your whole self to people. There isn't enough time. You have to create a character of yourself that is authentic. And so it's presenting yourself as a genuine character, which means you have to think of several true traits you have. Because people, you need to have a perspective, and it needs to be clear, and it can't be too complicated. So examples of authenticity are like speaking in your natural voice and not trying to speak the way you imagine someone who's good at speaking speaks. So that's one, being present in the room. So if something happens, the worst thing you can do is not acknowledge it. So like, let's say this speaker fell over, right? And imagine if that happened and then I just looked at it like a robot and then just kept going. Versus if I just said like, oh, that was weird. Now I'm a human in the room. Having a consistent perspective, and then part of that perspective is like, conveying emotions that are relatable to people. And the way I like to think about these three things is that you don't need to have, it's really hard to be proficient in all three of these, but you need to have two, right? You can get away with being weaker in one. So for example, if you are a really good performer and you have really great content, maybe you don't need to be the most authentic person. If you are very authentic and you have good content, maybe you don't need to be the best performer to be engaging. And if you are a really good performer and you're very authentic, then you can probably bullshit people, right? That makes you really good at sales, basically. So just in summary, in terms of the lessons I presented is, one, you're always in intense competition with people's attention. Never forget that. It's a very high bar. Don't delude yourself that people are ever paying attention to you or want to hear what you have to say. Second, you got to build trust with your audience. It's very important to do that, to create a sense of that you're kind of working together and cooperating. You're not against them. I've made that mistake many times on stage. And then in terms of lessons, one, put a lot of thought into your first impression. It's really important with public speaking. Two, try to figure out your strongest and weakest points. Have an idea of where they are and whatever you're saying. And strive for word economy is, you can really never stop striving to have fewer words. It's really amazing how many times you can edit a speech over and over again. And the fewer words you make yourself say, the easier it is to be an engaging performer. And then finally, try to maximize your likability by thinking about the character you're presenting to people when you're talking to them. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jacob. So we're gonna have a discussion part. And so you guys can share microphones. You have 3 microphones. I would very much encourage everyone to ask questions. Yeah, do you want to come up to the microphone and ask questions? I have questions, but I think the more questions you guys ask, the better.
I found a lot of the points interesting. However, I have a little more negative take on the whole whole interaction of our, I mean, these examples are important in terms of like our interactions with industry. There were a lot of things that were started. It is the case, for instance, that reporters do call academics a lot. But I would say on the flip side, I pulled numbers on this before, and I wish I could calculate the summary numbers, but I'm sure it's the case that like at least 80, if not 95% of papers are never covered by an academic or a serious media outlet. And that's probably because there could be some of this. I think there's two things related to that is, you know, you raised some good points, Gordon, in terms of how to outreach to the press. And I think that is extremely important. I've learned some of those lessons over time myself the hard way. No one ever taught me that stuff. I just trial and error, making lots of mistakes. But probably the first thing is what deans are concerned about and deans are writing about is that most academic research is really irrelevant for practice. And so, you know, you're talking about Ponzi schemes, for instance, like there's hardly any papers about Ponzi schemes, but you read it in the news all the time. So anyway, I do think the problem is also the fact that when you walk around the rooms here, you look at what's being presented, and you know, no one's going to write an article about any of that, no matter how much you simplify it, because it's irrelevant. So that's one problem. And then the second problem is, you know, how do we interface? So I thought your points, Gordon, about how to interface were spot on, and maybe we should think more about that as a business school in terms of our incentives. What are we incentivizing people? Not just publication, but maybe to have media citations tracked by the dean's office or something. I don't know. I open it up for y'all's thoughts on that.
This is very cool. Maybe you want to stay a little bit, because this really goes to the heart of what we're trying to do. And maybe you want to just tell us who you are briefly, so it's picked up.
Yes, I'm John Griffin at the University of Texas, and I do try to talk to the media in my papers, because I do think a lot of it's related to the media. You know, and I actually have one paper that was covered 850 news outlets. It was kind of by a random thing. It happened to be good timing and so forth. But then I have other papers that I think are very newsworthy, and I can't get anybody to write about them. So I find it very idiosyncratic. You know, right now everybody's saying, well, or before last year, and now everybody's writing about Trump, and the reporters are not interested in much else. But yeah, I don't know. I found it very. I think it's an important topic, so I'm glad you guys are having this session. I'm trying to learn.
Thanks so much. Please don't go too far so that you can follow up on the questions. And I don't want this to be siloed, so please, you know, everybody feel free to jump in. Gordon, maybe you want to start.
I wouldn't disagree with you that almost all academic papers are not covered for a general audience. I mean, your percentages, I think they might be higher than that, you know, I mean, and so I guess that's and it's true. Like I did walk around a few of these sessions, and some of them are quite, you know, deep into the kind of very particular, you know, like I think there was something novel data to track bankers or something like that. You know, like I mean, I didn't get into exactly what was being said, but you know, how that would translate to something that's interesting to the public. I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, that having an ongoing dialogue with journalists, particularly ones that you have had some experience and trust with, and then so that you build a kind of professional relationship with them, then when there is something that does come that could be of more general interest, particularly to things that are relevant and topical, then there's just much greater chance of those journalists, you know, biting. And so, but I don't disagree. It's challenging. You know, editors are interested in, you know, stuff that's going to get people to read it. And, you know, I mean, I cringe sometimes when I see the things, especially the online parts of our paper that get people interested, you know, so.
And I think it's just fascinating because, like, when we think about how people decide what to work on, and maybe Shaojun, it relates to also what you were talking about. So in your view, a lot of papers just simply academic exercises purely. That's your take, and it's kind of unusual to hear an academic say this. And one reason I wanted to set up this panel is because maybe we should listen to what the demand for research is also from general public, from being public intellectuals, and from journalists. So I don't know, Shaojun, do you want to?
Sure. I guess, John, great to see you again. And I just want to say I really admire all the work you're doing with forensic finance, and it has really taken off and has made an impact. So I think when the time is right, maybe after the panel, I would really love to hear your stories about how you got the 850 news coverages and how you really make this entire adventure take off. And I really sympathize with a lot of things that you're saying about the dean's incentives, the industry's incentive, the journalist's incentives. I think maybe hearing more success stories would help us align all this better.
I feel like there's a lot of failure stories even among myself. I think it's I think there's not a lot of, I am concerned that there's not as much interfacing. So the examples that Gordon was giving, for instance, are good ones where you call up somebody to ask about someone, and it sounds like you're a very qualified, reporter that goes out and researches this. But I don't know if, I think we really ought to think maybe about our incentive system and like you said, about how, what kind of topics we're working on. But then there's the second aspect about making things relatable to the press and so forth. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort. And I have more resources. I can get PhD students like Pratik to help me with that. But even despite of that, it's still very difficult. Sometimes I've emailed things to 100 reporters, and I'm sure they've written on similar topics, but for whatever reason they don't write back.
Can I ask, do you have a communications department at your university, or a people who are specifically tasked with liaising with journalists or the media?
I have, but there is a team, but they're tasked with doing a bunch of other things. So okay. I basically I kind of taught them how to do this.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, at the University of BC, I don't know if I don't think that they work on other things, but there is a specific group that is in their broader communications, umbrella that is tasked with dealing with the media. And then I think there's 4 or 5 of them or whatever, and they have a boss or whatever, and each of them has an area. So if you go and if I go and say, I want to talk to somebody there and say, hey, do you have anyone in the law department, or in the law faculty that could speak to this kind of issue? I can send them an email or call them directly, and they have 4 or 5 topics that they work on. And so, I mean, that's more about me looking for somebody to comment on something specific that I'm writing about, rather than a paper or a study that they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think if they would invest more, if business schools would invest more in these research teams, perhaps they could have more interfacing, because it takes a lot of work for a faculty member to do this. And
oh yeah.
We have no expertise in this.
Yeah. No.
I'd say I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're already on the spot. What if I were to ask you, some research that you're working on that you think would be interesting for media to cover? If you just kind of pitch it in 1 minute, and then we comment on it. Can we do that? Or if you'd rather not.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I have 2 things. I mean, one is related to anti-money laundering laws and crypto and related to anti-money laundering laws. And so basically, we look at the ban of Tornado Cash and whether that was effective, and we found it actually is effective, but a lot of the bans against mixers and so forth are being rolled back. So it's kind of technical. There was also a ban against Binance. That was somewhat effective in terms of taking dirty money. And right now, there's a lot of legislation before Congress specifically about how we're going to deal with this dirty money and the crypto industry. And the crypto industry is really arguing for self-policing. And our paper shows that self-policing was a huge failure. and yet we're going back, we're rolling back these policies. So I do think it has a lot of implications, yeah, I think just one small media outlet ran with the paper. And that's probably a function of me not knowing how to push it and so forth. Yeah.
Let's workshop it, guys. So what can we do to...
It's interesting because money laundering in British Columbia has been a hot button topic for going back like a decade. And so, and honestly, like if I was, it's fallen off a little bit because there's other issues that are going on now, but like 3 or 4 years ago, if you had sent me if I knew you and you'd sent me a paper about that, I probably would have written about it. Because it gets to the very heart of things in terms of, like self-policing. And so right now in Canada and in British Columbia, there's a big move to try and tighten laws and bring in more enforcement and that kind of thing. So something that would show that self-policing doesn't work would be relevant. But again, it's all about timing and, is the topic immediately, like, is it of relevance right now? I guess, but if I came across a paper, even when I was in the middle of writing all about that from the University of Texas, probably because it's from the University of Texas, I wouldn't do it because I'm here in Canada, I don't know. So it's complicated, right?
So I'm going to ask Jacob in a second about how one can make anti-money laundering research irresistibly engaging. But before that, I'll just ask Pascal, you know a lot of fintechs, and I think there are some fintechs also in this AML space, anti-money laundering space. Do you know anything about those and how those guys might want to collaborate with an academic researcher?
Yeah, I think it all depends on the focus of the research. And for fintechs, most times, speed and value creation for them is really the driver. But for those within the crypto space as well, I know a few that are close to me working in crypto, and everybody is talking about speed. So it's a possibility that is explorable if they can see potential value in the academic side of things. I think that's something always worth exploring.
I mean, that's one thing that I would say is that, if you talk to fintech founders, CEOs, they're incredibly accessible, and they might actually, have an interest in this, and they might have interesting data. And so, to me, that's one possible avenue. Jacob, anti-money laundering research, how would you pitch it? Again, putting you on the spot, but feel free to.
Well, I just have I'm going to stay in my lane. Just one observation. I don't know if this is just how you were going through your thoughts. You were sort of stream of consciously speaking, but you said really the succinct summary of what you wanted to say at the very end of what you said. So if you just in listening to you talk about your research, if you start in saying self-policing does not work in the crypto industry, that to me, now I understand what you're saying, right? That's the main point, right? And that captures my attention. And then that engages me to listen to, well, why? Now I'll listen to the more technical stuff as to how you figured that out. But I have the idea, your main idea in my head now. So I know your thesis.
I think that's a great point. I think, I think when you write an academic paper and it's got like 7 to 8 main results, and then, it's confusing. I'm almost putting it out there, like, hey, press, here's something, expecting, and it takes a unique reporter that's going to be able to do that and summarize it. So I have written some summaries, some boiled down summaries, but even those are probably too technical. And so that probably hurts the general audience. Like, how does it relate?
I think in academia, people are establishing there's a deliberate way of communicating to be as accurate as possible established prior research. It's kind of, I know in stand-up comedy, like if you want to get people's attention, you do the opposite. You make a bold claim, right? And then maybe people is that correct? And then you defend it. And that's not a good way to communicate in academia, but it tends to be a really good way to capture people's attention.
That's really important, because I think that's one advantage of the press writing about some numbers. So for instance, I wrote a paper on pig butchering, which is a scamming activity. And the press runs with a number that is about $28 billion a year in activity that's happening. But if I really want to explain that correctly, there's all kinds of caveats and so forth, and no one wants to read all that stuff, right? So what's the headline number? It's a roughly 28 billion, that's roughly right, but there's a lot of caveats with that. And as an academic, I got to talk about all that stuff.
So to follow up on some of the themes, my second collaboration with practitioners, with Investment Management Association, resulted in a paper in Journal of Finance, and my co-author was at the university where they had a very good press relations team who put us in touch with the Financial Times. So the Financial Times journalist schedules a call, and their first question is, and so this is a 50-page paper, lots of stuff going on about how investors make decisions to invest in mutual funds. First question, he says, is how would you summarize this paper in one number? Now, that was a lesson, right? It just didn't occur to me to even think of this. So I was completely stumped. And so that's something to chew on. But one issue that came up here is that, okay, so some of the research, may not even be that practically relevant to begin with. But then, if we take the research that potentially is seriously practically relevant, and I do want to go to Paschal here, because, you have some of the same challenges. You're working on something that's incredibly important for the world. I'm pretty sure you would love to get lots of media coverage.
Absolutely.
So what are the challenges? And maybe, Gordon, maybe you can also workshop your challenges, because in some way they echo the themes that we're talking about here.
So for me, the initial challenge we had was when I envisioned this, when I envisioned this new world, as we call it internally, where people can move cross-border and still move their hard-earned financial history. When we envisioned what that future was going to look like, I sent personal LinkedIn messages to every reporter I know in this country, right? And I said, we're trying to do some incredible work here. We believe this has the ability to shift things, not just for migrants, but for the economy. And this is the size of impact that our work is capable of having, right? And everything I heard was, but this is still an idea, right? So do you have data? Do you have impact results to show? What have you done, right? So these are still early stages. And what it did was just to send us back to the drawing board to say, you know what, go do an incredible work, get some data, show some impacts, the story will follow, right? We've had some good coverage in the past, I would say 8 months now. Not from the best houses yet, but for some ones that are reputable in the country so far, who have decided to pick up our story, run interviews with me, and talk about the work we're doing. But we would like to see even more. And I think for us, where the real challenge is we need to demonstrate way more impact at scale. I think that would get more attention from the press. So if we have some support from academia to collaborate and work on some existing projects we have, both pilots and even existing clients that are actually moving this data, I think that collaboration might actually help drive these conversations at a broader scale in the media.
Gordon, any thoughts on how Paschal and his company can get worldwide blanket news coverage, and also Jacob Shaojun, any thoughts?
I mean, not to be trite or anything, but you just have to have a good story, I'm going to digress a little bit here. When I worked in a smaller newspaper, and that was in a forest region, and so it was in the middle of like, we're having one again, but it was an earlier one, a big lumber trade dispute. So I was writing these really in-depth stories to explain what the ongoing trade dispute was about and how it would affect people, and it involved jobs and investment and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, there was a flurry of people who were dying in the forest industry. So I was writing all these stories about why this was happening and everything. And so, you know, I mean, people read those stories, sure. But one day I was in the grocery store or something like that, and there was two women in front of me, and they were talking about this other story I had written, because a sort of older gentleman had walked into our newspaper, and he'd lost his Cocker Spaniel. Somebody had stolen it. And so he was a fellow that had some mental health challenges. Anyway, we sat him down, we wrote the story, and he had a picture of his dog, and he was just like devastated. Anyways, so we wrote a story about that. Then somebody donated a Cocker Spaniel to him. So we wrote a story about that. And then somebody found out who had stolen it, brokered the other Cocker Spaniel to be returned. So we ended up with 2 Cocker Spaniels. Well, those stories were so well read, it was insane. Like people would stop me in the street and ask me about it. These two, these two women randomly talking about it in front of me. Well, and so, that's the challenge, right? Is that what is it people are interested in? Like it's not sort of like what should people be interested in, because I have views on that. They should be interested about the softwood lumber trade dispute and people dying in the forest industry, but that's not how it works. And so I think what everyone here is saying is that you have to work really, really hard at getting an attention of a general audience, whether you're a person running a business or you're an academic. Honestly, even as a reporter, like I write stories and I think how we have like tracking now, with all, in terms of like who reads what, and you write a story you think that's really important, and according to the online numbers, no one read it, and then you write some other story that your editor made you write, and then it blows up and it's like hundreds of thousands of people read it, and you're just like, but you just have to I think you just have to work harder than you think that you have to at this, and you have to be more sophisticated at it than you think.
I was going to say, Jacob.
Yeah, well, I have no idea how to get media attention for anything, but I think there's the one thing I do know about is like refining an act, and there's something to be said about workshopping. It takes a lot of trial and error to develop like a stand-up comedy act, and you more or less do it the same way a lot, and you make it as good as you can, and you tweak it. And it's the same thing, I think, for any kind of pitch or communication thing. And although you may not get anywhere with it for a long time, when you do get opportunities for people to look at it, I don't know how you make those happen. You sort of have your act developed and ready to go, and then if it's refined by that point, people are going to be impressed by it, and it could take off. Like there's a quote in comedy where it takes like 10 years to make an overnight success, right? And I often see like comedians blow up, somebody who I know, and I'm like, they were doing this like years ago. It's exact same jokes, exact same character. Circumstances were different then, but it takes that kind of work behind the scenes to make the most of the opportunities you do get.
But the theme of stories, and Pascal, you have a story. You have an amazing story, which is you were a high-flying banker, and then you're having trouble getting a loan. That's I don't know, that sounds to me like comedy material, Jacob. No, like if you have like
and his dog got stolen too. I forgot that. Right?
So you want to add these kind of details and some kind of contrast, exaggeration, those comedy tools, and suddenly it's like a story that becomes very visceral, very visible, and you're reacting to it. So I don't know. It seems to me like the story is already there, and maybe it's like a question of like polishing. I mean, it doesn't have to be a comedy story, right? But you have an amazing story. Right, because if that's what happened to you, who were hugely successful in your home country, you can just imagine someone who did not have. So and it seems to be like there's some kind of application to us finance profs. Shaojun, did you have experience with reaching out to journalists or them reaching out to you?
I try to reach out to some people, not much success. Sometimes people reach to me, and of course, it works out, but it does come with the challenges that they want a big headline, and we have to make it accurate. You have to put all the complications, on the cautions, or the assumptions and between things in order to make it accurate. But maybe, out there we worry about traditional media maybe dead already, but now we're really trying to get the attention of the traditional media. Maybe it's also helpful to just explore the other channels like X, LinkedIn, podcasts. My husband does not even read newspapers or at all. So it really doesn't matter whether it's covered or not, but he listens to podcasts when he drives. And he comes home and tells me, I heard this podcast on this academic paper, and why don't you get on NPR to talk about your papers? So there's excitement in there. So maybe we can have another panel to brainstorm how to come up with non-traditional ways of sharing insights and engage people with the right audience who's actually interested in our stories.
That's a great point, but also I wanted to ask you from your perspective, do you think that the incentives for academics to engage with the media and to pursue practitioner relevant work, and those are two different questions, are they as strong as they should be? Are they too strong, not strong enough?
I think the incentive's there, but it's not imminent and it's not in your face. So there are different ways to pursue academic success. This will be one of the channels. There are some incentives. It may not be, I guess, when you're trying to get tenure, what matters is the top publications. Nothing else really matters as much. But with time, those incentives kind of become a little stronger. For example, you're looking for impact of your research. And Google citations is impact, media coverage is impact as well. So things do care about that from as far as I know. And for example, if you're doing the same research that industry people do, they're going to check your SSRN. So you may not have a huge Google citations, but you may have huge SSRN downloads, and that's impact as well. So we are moving the word in a tiny little bit, although it's not very loud, but we're doing a little bit. And of course, it helps you in your own teaching, for example. It helps a lot when you're engaging with MBA students or EMB students. Your stories, your experience would really come in to help you connect with them. You can become a star teacher. And there are schools who don't have undergrad programs. They only have MBAs and EMPs. So you're going to be certain profiles of schools would be more interested in your background and offer you the targeted opportunities.
Great. So we'll have to wrap up within a few minutes. And basically, I would like to see if any closing thoughts. If someone is absolutely desperate to ask a question, yeah, okay, time for a very quick question. While you're readying your question, so I'll then ask you for closing thoughts. And one question specifically I've been dying to ask Jacob is, because I think humor is an incredibly powerful communication tool. It's going to be what to do if a joke bombs, if you try to make a joke. So, but your question.
Cool. This should be quick, just for Pascal. It seems that you're bringing information to what is also an incentive problem. So if you convince some lender that someone who's priced their 600 FICO score is really an 800 FICO score, they still don't have an incentive to give them all of that surplus. And they might want to lend to them, but they still would want to lend to them at the market rate. So given that you have to convince lenders one at a time, I'm curious how you think you get to the good equilibrium where people are priced just like if they were from the original country.
Okay. Sorry, don't go, please. Do you mind come back, please? Yes, sorry. So let me understand your question. So you're asking if people move from country to country and the scores are different between the geographies?
Right. So my understanding is that you bring information to lenders that people who are migrants might actually have good credit. Their true credit score is actually quite good, but the market is kind of pricing them wrong.
Okay.
And the interest rate they're getting is, in a sense, too high. But obviously, the lenders have an incentive to charge them the high interest rate, even if they know better, is my point. So I'm curious, in terms of like, information from academia improving the world, you could have the perfect credit model for them. And it's not obvious to me that that's good enough to get us to the better world that you want.
Yeah.
I'll just ask you to also introduce yourself, and also it sounds to me like you guys maybe should discuss collaboration. Would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Connor from the University of Texas. I'm a grad student.
Okay, thank you. So if you don't mind, just hold on. So your questions, I'm reading two different parts in your question. So let me break it down the way I understand it, and then we can, find a way forward. So the first piece is the lender having an incentive to lend at a higher interest because the credit score is not great or it's in existence, correct? So the challenge today is that the banks want to do more business, but they cannot. So if they don't have data to make that decision, they are limited in how much business they can do. I was speaking with someone just before the session who said that they can only access a $300 credit card limit. Now think about how much can a bank make on $300 compared to if the bank actually did have access to the person's real data, they can actually give up to $3,000. So that person can access more line of credit. The bank has more share of wallets and interest to get from that person. So from an incentive point of view, the more data the banks can access, the bigger the business they can do with immigrants. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thanks so much. So we're wrapping up, but I do have some inside information. The keynote actually is going to start 5 minutes late, so we are wrapping up, but you don't have to worry about being late there. So I'll ask everyone any closing thoughts, anything, any wisdom you want to leave us with.
I would just say, given a little bit of the feedback from the audience, that maybe to think about this as a kind of like a spectrum, I mean, I realize that people are trying to get, a conduit from their academic papers to the general audience. But I mean, again, I think this whole relationship building thing can work. I mean, I don't know if they do that at other universities, but again, at the University of British Columbia and at Simon Fraser University, if we have like a topical issue, like say there's whether it's an election, a federal or provincial election, or some kind of thing that's going on with something that's happening with like floods and wildfires, they put out expert lists and say these people are available to talk to the media, and they give their numbers and emails and the times they're there. And again, it's just another pathway to make this connection with people, build relationships, and then maybe that will lead to you getting to know journalists, and then you can target where you'd send your research.
Great. Shaojun?
I would say just good luck to all of us getting some attention from the real world.
Pascal?
Yeah, I'll say good luck as well, and hope to explore more collaborations with people in academia who might want to discuss more about this, the work that we're doing.
Thank you. And Jacob, any thoughts? Plus, I want to know what you do for joke bombs.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, well, if you remember what I said, I hope that you can maybe start putting together what you should do if a joke bombs. I mean, there's different, it depends. Does the audience know that a joke bombs? If the audience doesn't realize that a joke bombed, you just keep on talking, right? If they're aware of it, you have to acknowledge it in some way that keeps that sense of cooperation and keeps things likable. You don't want to make them, look down on you, make it weird. Often I try to embody the audience's perspective, like say something like, can you think, isn't it like weird that I thought that was something that you were gonna like, Or a joke about how like all day, I thought that this was something that was gonna connect me with people, and it turns out it's only me who thinks this. But the main thing with jokes, you can't, adding jokes, people don't add jokes in talking because jokes are risky and it's scary, and telling jokes is hard. But there's a big risk reward there, and if you're gonna tell jokes, which I think everyone should, you are going to fail. It's just inevitable. And the key thing is, I think to think about just this much larger things like the universe, existence, and just keep in mind that none of this matters, right? So if you have an anchor in your mind, it's a negative, positive thinking. That like, in the scheme of things, this really doesn't matter. You can override the animal psychology you have to be scared in front of people. And it takes a lot of work to do. But that's my main piece of advice. Because if that's your attitude, then you're going to be a lot more likable when things don't go your way when you're speaking in front of people.
Thanks so much. You guys, you have been brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the audience.